It has been official, folks. 2024, another great year for cinema, is coming to an end, and so it seems fitting to revisit and list the highlights the film industry delivered this year, especially given the fact that companies more and more shape their multi-millionaire productions to align with the audience's shifting demand, much more with a cost-benefit balance in mind rather than the genuine purpose of creating art by delivering good stories. Subsequently, the cinematographic panorama seems to favorize saga continuations, be it sequels, spin-offs, reboots, that the audiences are somewhat already familiar with over new, potentially economically risky ideas, which is not necessarily negative, as long as they succeed to continue a story instead of unnecessarily prolongate it, and have something valuable to add to a franchise. The point I'm making here is that nowadays no list as such will be exempt of sequels, and that for those willing to hate on a film just for being a sequel, I ask them to be more understanding and, after perusing the most recent box office successes, determine what the audiences are really interested in seeing, and to be more open-minded and not just disparage valuable artistic efforts with the excuse of a supposed sequelitis tendency. And with that said, let the list begin. But before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to my channel if you like my videos, and if you have any idea for a future cinema related video, comment it down below. And please note that the following list is completely subjective and based on my own personal opinion, so feel free to disagree and comment your own list below. Every opinion matters. And to the annoying "where's this film?" people, obviously I did not watch every single movie this year, but a fair portion of the major releases, so please judge the list for what it is and not for what it's not. Now let's begin this list with an honorable mention that just missed the top 10, that being the case of Wicked Part 1, an uplifting and colorful musical that most likely left no one indifferent or unsurprised. It is surely far from perfect, given its slow pace and unsatisfactory ending as it being the first part of a story split into two parts, as well as the amount of musical numbers becoming a bit overwhelming, but it is the incredible acting and singing performances of the two protagonists, let alone their charisma, dynamic and development from polar opposites to a sister-like bond, the relevant social commentary, the hilarious comedic touches, and most importantly, the whimsical and magical visual world that create an immersive experience and ultimately won me over. And finally, kicking off the list at number 10, we have A Quiet Place Day 1, a great origin story and expansion to the post-apocalyptic world dominated by creatures who haunt by sound, pictured in the main saga of films. Not only is it fantastic for all science fiction and dystopian film fans to watch a metropolis like New York City get raided and civilians, driven by panic and everything but rational thoughts and survival instinct, get massacred by one of the coolest and most menacing recent sci-fi movie creatures, but also to reflect on how our governments, as well as people smart enough to adapt and willing to survive, would react to such a sudden and imminent threat. Moreover, the conditions of our protagonist, Sam, are interesting ones to explore, as she's a terminally ill cancer patient living at a hospice with no hope whatsoever for a better future. And so the deadly invasion leads her to accept her fate, not before attempting to revive a nostalgic childhood memory by getting a pizza at Patsy's like she used to with her father. Along the way she encounters Eric, at first sticking to her out of fear and shock, but that decides to help her in her journey and fulfill her last wish, resulting into the most beautiful and adorable scene in the film, that, on the sly, symbolically recalls the ideal attitude in hard times where unity is in question, that of solidarity and cooperation. And of course, I'm not forgetting to mention that the horror and suspense in this movie are amazing, and so are the resulting action scenes, like the stampede of fleeing civilians, or my favorite, the flooded subway scene. All in all, the breath of fresh air the prequel offers to the franchise is deeply appreciated, at least by me. Next in my list is David Leitch's The Fall Guy, that despite being an action comedy over-budgeted Hollywood production, still underperformed in the box office and left the studio with multi-millionaire financial losses. Very unfortunate, because it was surprisingly, given its genres and their recent history, actually fairly great. See, my issue with American action comedy films is that they almost inevitably fall into obvious cliches, where its humor usually sucks and is mostly concentrated in unfunny sexist or racist jokes, and where the title of action film guarantees no plot whatsoever, but a 2-hour-long display of plain violence for the absolute fuck of it. And I was extremely relieved that that was absolutely not the case for The Fall Guy. Here, stories of self-improvement, crime investigation, charade exposure, and the healing of a love relationship are dealt with, simultaneously with splashes of great humor and a lot of, not necessarily pointless, action. Sure, one could make the case that the humor is silly and not always lands, but we would all be lying if we didn't admit this movie made us chuckle a decent amount of times, at the very least with Ryan Gosling crying to All Too Well by Taylor Swift in the car. Moreover, what distinguishes this movie from all the plain, clone-like violent American action films is that its action and violent scenes, that are mostly great, case in point the boat chase or the ending, are not solely for the purpose of spilling blood, but have a point and reason to exist, that of occulting an accidental murder to preserve one Hollywood actor's reputation, subsequently questioning how far self-centered billionaire celebrities are willing to undergo in order to hide their atrociousness from audiences, as well as how far the industry is willing to play along, and how easily one's actions can be misunderstood and sentenced by the public with the help of malicious manipulation techniques. Following that, I have Chris Sanders' The Wild Robot, which for many probably should rank higher, but in my opinion still contains a few flaws that prevent it from being perfect. We're told the story of Ross, a companion robot stranded in a remote island forced to take care of the upbringing of a gosling after accidentally crushing its nest in the near future. And so a story of perseverance and parenthood, where Ross has to learn how to appropriately make sure for Brightbill to successfully learn to survive on his own and integrate in his respective community is told. Disadvantages, aside from the obvious, being him suffering from a minor disability and thus being mocked by his peers, while less prominently touching subjects of egoism, exclusion, kindness, and coexistence too. I have to give credit to the risky, unexpected calls the film makes, such as the bitter, dark humor that made me chuckle quite a few times, or its transition into a fast-paced action movie towards its third act, that I also loved. The vibrant, colorful, oil painting-like style is also worth mentioning for its originality. I would be interested in DreamWorks to explore such innovative animation ideas further and more often. However, despite the emotional depth, importance, and human nature of the discussed topics in the story, ironically told by robot and animals, in my opinion, the story fails to reach the level of commotion anticipated given its very safe ending, and runs a bit too long as well, but that doesn't prevent it from at least getting a respectable position in this list. Continuing this list is a controversial pick. That would be the latest Amy Winehouse biopic, Back to Black. To state the obvious, the acting performances are superb, the recreations of Winehouse's performances and concerts spot on, and the incorporations of her songs to the plot highly cinematic and extremely fitting to her story. Moreover, addressing the elephant in the room, no, I don't think this movie is neither disrespectful to her legacy nor exploitative of her success. Sure, her heavy substance abuse and alcohol consumption shown throughout can seem a little graphic, as well as the plot mostly concentrating on her relationship with Blake Fielder Civil a bit shallow considering the whole of her career. But I think those sentencing the movie for that are missing the point of the film, being loyal to the truth and depicting Amy's life just as what it was. A tragedy. Of course, keeping an eye on her unparalleled talent and legendary musical impact as well as her kindness, sense of humor and charisma at the same time. Nevertheless, I immensely respect this film for depicting her naiveness and her blindness by love. Hence, her desperate desire to be loved and to be a mother led her to fall into an abusive relationship and finally to a downward spiral of drug abuse once all valuable she perceived in life was taken away from her. And that does not leave her in a bad light. Much to the contrary, it creates understanding and empathy for her struggles, all while also remembering what a special human being hid behind one of the most important music acts of the century, tragically taken away too soon from this world. The highest grossing animated film in history ensues, Pixar's Inside Out 2, that despite ranking this high and me having loved it upon release, still let me down just a tad, mainly because the first film is perfect in my opinion and one of my personal all-time favorites. However, even though it clearly fails to be as emotional and touching as the first, this is still quality content that earned a spot here. Whether it is the colorful and fluent animation, the honorable mention being the hilarious video game character movements and graphics of Lance Slashblade, the exaggerated amount of creativity ability to represent every idea in one's mind. Case in point, big plot elements like the secret chamber or the visual representation of a brainstorm. Likewise, smaller gags like Mount Crushmore or the Parade of Future Careers. Or the relevant main message of embracing every, even the less favorable aspects of your personality, despite being more or less achieved by accident in the film. Pixar clearly put in the effort to ensure a meaningful continuation rather than a cash grab sequel. The film structure, similar to the first movie, is given more complexity as to the new set of characters and their arcs, whose designs, by the way, I love, as their appearances match the way the emotions make you feel if you think about it. Thus, every new emotion acts for Riley's best, with anxiety's mistakes showing parallels to Joy's in the previous film, leading Riley to suppress vital emotions to achieve meaningless objectives in the long term. Hence the climax, where anxiety realizes her damage by pushing Riley too much, which manifests in the visual representation of a panic attack, is excellent. In conclusion, another win for Pixar, certainly so in the box office. Following that is the rebirth of a former great saga that would be its new installment, alienromulus, after a turbulent recent past. With the help of mostly practical effects and scenery, Fede Alvarez greatly succeeds in creating horror and suspense, thus making the xenomorph, finally, scary again, by, interestingly, combining both horror strategies regarding the screen time of the xenomorph in Alien and Aliens, first shown very little to stress its mysteriousness, and then increasing the menace by introducing an entire colony, that I think worked really well. Moreover, I also greatly enjoyed the characters and the context on their society that fuel their decisions, especially that of their protagonist Rain, and her synthetic companion Andy, undergoing interesting transformations as to his behavior, creating tense conflicts and moving the plot forward. Plus, the decisions made by a pack of youngsters were mostly smart and, if less rational, at least understandable, which I wish could have been the case for a group of scientists in both Ridley Scott's prequels, so I definitely appreciate that improvement. However, notwithstanding its flaws, such as its stretching out too long, its fourth act being too long and forced, and a great lot of scenes making absolutely no sense, I can certainly say that I felt a glimpse of the saga's former greatness thanks to Alvarez's efforts and admiration of this universe. Next, I have the fourth installment in a recent reboot prequel series, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, that felt like it came out of nowhere, and boy did it strike hard. Set 300 years after the rise of the apes as the dominant species on planet Earth in Caesar's reign, we're introduced to a very distant and refreshing setting, the best possible idea they could have come up with for a sequel, with the ape population having expanded and split apart into clans, dwelling on a now much more dystopian-looking environment, where almost every trace of former human civilization has been reclaimed by nature, and humans have been reduced to living in the shadows, for which, by the way, I congratulate the visual effects team, as the reality presented continues to blow me away every time I see it. And so, following the story of Noah, whose clan has been captured by the Emperor calling himself Proximus Caesar, twisting the teachings of the latter, heavy philosophical themes, additionally to the ones previously introduced in the saga, are dealt with, such as the possibility and hope of a peaceful coexistence between species, the respect for diversity and freedom, as well as the twisting of positive values and the manipulation of one's legacy to control the masses, up to the point where Noah, unaware of who Caesar was and his teachings, ironically acts much more accordingly to his values than those who claim to be maintaining his legacy, but instead disrespectfully twist his words to commit atrocities. Add that to a set of extremely likable characters like Raka or Noah's friends, or even the antagonistic figure of Proximus Caesar, who is interestingly not inherently evil or merciless, just delusional, acting in accordance to what he thinks is best and will protect his species. And the highlight, in my opinion, the human chase scene honoring the original, and you get a truly great sequel that can only make me more excited for what is to come in the future of the apes. And now we have finally arrived to the top 3, consisting of movies that I could have swapped around any moment, as I honestly love them all equally, am blown away by them and consider them to be near perfect. And so, kicking off the top 3 is Disney's Young Woman and the Sea, an extraordinary story of dedication, perseverance, and discipline to attain your dreams. That is the biography of American competitive swimmer Gertrude Trudy Adderley, the first woman to swim across the English Channel. In a world where entertainment businesses, especially Disney, are obsessed with pushing shallow premises of feminism by unnecessarily overpowering female characters, we're presented a story that is genuine and loyal to the truth, that of a woman born in sexist, patriarchal times, namely America at the beginning of the last century, decided to pursue her dream of becoming a competitive swimmer, willing to dodge the obvious adversities in her path whilst fighting for equal treatment, chances, and representation of women in the sports scene. Adversities being her obvious disadvantage as a woman to introduce herself and even stand out in a field dominated by men, at first struggling to even have a chance to pursue her dream given the sexist expectations of her father, then staying afloat with difficulty due to the biases of trainers and sponsors, and even failing at her first attempt to make history thanks to the jealousy of Jabez Wolf, forcefully her trainer for the first attempt to cross the English Channel, who, unable to accept a woman to accomplish what he had failed to miserably, sabotages her attempt and makes it seem like a heroic rescue to the public. And it is that pity and compassion we sense for her when she faces injustices that pays off when we witness her successes and accolades. And I'll tell you what, certainly Trudy's charisma and wittiness do nothing but fuel the viewer's appreciation of her. The fact she maintains a joyous and rebellious attitude despite all the wrongdoings she is exposed to, and that, in spite of being clearly discriminated against, earns the respect of her fellow competitors by showing her cooperativity and passion, for which I congratulate Daisy Ridley. Nothing further to say than that Disney cooked here, and I wish they would allocate more money to the promotion of such releases that push the representation of women in men-dominated fields by means of real equality. At number 2, I have Denis Villeneuve's brilliant Dune Part 2. Listen, I could talk for hours about how amazing this film is. Thus, to save your time and mine, let's keep it as short as possible. The scenery and cinematography, no words. Absolutely no words. I'll just say that it's a must-watch if you care about visual art, and that it is so immersive I at some point believed I was a Fremen, deeply integrated and adapted to the cryptic society and desolate yet beautiful world that is Arrakis. The action and visual effects make you experience every possible emotion in cinema, from excitement when Paul Atreides rides his first sandworm, to worry and concern when he is faced to accept his role as a messiah, to the Fremen and lead them towards a bloodbath with small chances of victory, to straight up nervousness and anticipation during the final duel with Fate Rotha that had me clenched at my seat waiting for the outcome. The symbolism and philosophical ideas introduced that partially serve to question the figure of a messiah that the masses follow blindly and feel a false attachment to, that leads to their easy manipulation and demise, case in point the need to have a divinity to worship and follow to add meaning to your otherwise meaningless existence, as well as wars and violence to solve diplomatic conflicts, and the fall of leaders who care to maintain peace and the well-being of their communities instead of selfishly exploiting self-interests and imperialistically imposing their beliefs and reign of terror to outside communities via force or violence. All of this while also telling a credible and heart-touching love story that's a metaphor for tolerance and diversity despite being a sci-fi film. Man, the first part walked so that this one could run, or even fly. Again, I could go on for hours, but my final thesis is that we're witnessing a new sci-fi universe and film saga at the level of classics like Star Wars that will become a timeless classic in the future. Rise. And finally, at number 1, the best film of 2024 in my opinion, and I know I'm gonna get hate for this, but I have to give it to Joker Folie à Deux. No one will ever make me hate this movie. After the smashing box office success that was 2019's Joker, critically acclaimed yet highly controversial due to some false interpretations as to the film's message, glorifying violence and sympathizing with cold-blooded psychotic killers, Todd Phillipps, director of both films, was handed $200 million by Warner wanting a sequel to make further profit, so he really sat down and thought of a way to make the first movie's message clearer this time, at the same time thinking of new elements to make the sequel stand out from the already great first Joker, and the result is almost the best you can get from a sequel nowadays. I have revisited this film many times, each time with more excitement, and I can only continue to say that it blows me away. From the big plot points and performances to the finest details and symbols, it serves as a perfectly thought out conclusion to Arthur Fleck's character arc. And boy, is it a journey from start to finish. I'm not going to go over every detail that makes it brilliant. There's my analysis for that if you want to check it out. However, I'll go over the most relevant. The jazz 50s and 60s inspired musical performances are stellar, magical, sometimes heart-touching, sometimes uplifting. Have seldom experienced such heavy emotions when Fleck sang Bewitched to Lee on television, or such amazement when they share their mad fantasy of happiness in scenes like the If My Friends Could See Me Now or We're Gonna Build a Mountain Once, whose brilliance is only fueled by the stunning work of the visual effects team and cinematography that is at times colorful and playful or lackluster and dark. I swear, every frame of this movie I could use as a wallpaper. The acting, again, stellar, both by Lady Gaga and as Lee, that successfully brings out the worst in Arthur by falsely making him feel loved for his Joker persona, and by Joaquinphoenix as Arthur Fleck, delusional and unstable as to his inverse transformation and development throughout the film. Finally escaping the fantasy of believing himself to be an unstoppable justice defensor, to realizing the consequences and damage of his actions and being accordingly punished, comically having the same fate as Murray Franklin, that is, being unjustifiably murdered by some random delusional individual who thought themselves to be doing justice. The plot point that fuel his transformation being magnificent, by the way. First, his motivation to reassume his Joker persona as to him feeling supported and loved, his suspicion to be taken advantage of and manipulation, and finally him giving up his identity after being put down to earth by Gary's testimony and the physical abuse from the Arkham State Hospital guards. All of it paints the picture of who Arthur Fleck really was, a misunderstood, mentally ill psychopath that was never loved for who he was, but for who he thought he'd become by committing atrocious murders falsely in the name of justice under a state of fantasy and delusion that I wish more people would have understood or appreciated. And that was it for my favorite movies of the year. Now, of course, it is your turn to comment your own thoughts and list. Every opinion counts. And as for me, this was all I had to say. Until next year of movies, bye. See you around.